I will tell you how an exposure triangle works. So we're going to shoot this little coin there, and the camera we are going to use is Nikon's very own D5300. Before we get into shooting process, let's discuss how the camera works and what are the factors that controls the light that hits the sensor after it is reflected from the subject. So everything between sensor and the subject will play its role to control the light. So one of those things is inside the lens and two of those things are inside the camera. So the thing that is inside the lens is called aperture. Aperture is the opening in the lens which opens or closes and causes the light to flow into the camera, or if the opening is small, a small amount of light will come inside the camera, and if the opening is large, obviously more light will enter the camera. Then once the light is through the lens, now it will go and try to hit the sensor. But before it hits the sensor, a shutter has to be removed. And shutter is just like a shutter of a shop. When you open a shop, you remove the shutter and then you enter the shop. In this case, you can think of a sensor as a shop and shutter is the shutter. So once the shutter is open, the light or the image will hit the sensor. And sensor has its own properties. Sensor has the sensitivity towards light, which is called ISO sensitivity. If we set the value of ISO to be a large value, then the sensor sensitivity increases, and if we decrease it, the sensor sensitivity decreases. And all these three factors, or all these three things, are in line to the place where the light enters the lens or enters the camera. Okay, let's start with the first setting, which is aperture. So first of all, let me tell you, I am shooting in aperture priority mode. My lens is on manual focus. Then I'm going to set my ISO to 200. Just, you can set it to any value exactly, but I'm setting it to 200 just to make sure everything gets clear and fine. So now the next thing is, let me check my focus first, so you can really zoom in on your subject and then check the focus. You can see around the coin the focus area, so our subject is quite in focus. So let's start with f1.8 and let's shoot and know what exactly we're going to do. Okay, here is 1.8, the first shot. I'm not going to discuss it first, but later we will discuss it and I will tell you what I want to do. Then let's go to maybe f2.8, or let's go to 2.8. Yeah, so here, second shot. Okay, let's go to 4. Then let's go to 5.6. Then one shot at 8. Then 11. So the only settings I'm making are the aperture. So everything, every other detail, camera is calculating and using its own exposure meter to calculate the values of other parameters. So we have gone till f16. So you will see the result and we will discuss it in detail on our camera, on our computer screen. We're done with all the shots for Aperture. So let me quickly do the same thing for shutter speed and ISO, and then I will meet you at my computer screen. Finally, our results are out. First of all, let's discuss the aperture. So if you can see, if our aperture is very small, we cannot make any sense of the background. But as we move towards the right and we are increasing our aperture, our background is getting more clearer. And if we move our subject further closer to the background, you will see the background will even get more clearer. So what are these things? Depth of field and your bokeh effect. Bokeh effect is the blur of the background, and the more it is in case of single person portraits, the better it looks. And then your depth of field is the overall area, or overall, you can say, longitudinal area which is in focus or out of focus. So for example, in case of f1.8, there is a very little area which is in focus and which is closer to my subject. When I was zooming in on the coin, you could see there was a very little area which was in focus because I was at 1.8. And when I moved more towards the higher value, maybe f16, this depth of field becomes, you know, less shallower, because at 1.8 it was very shallow, very small area was in focus. So sometimes the beginners, they really do not understand what is focus and what is depth of field. So sometimes they are thinking the depth of field is the focus. Focus, on the other hand, is a totally different thing, which you can say mostly depends on the shutter speed, or how low is the shutter speed, or how much shaky are your hands while you are holding the camera. All these small factors, they really affect your focus. So try to separate these two things, depth of field and your focus. So the second thing we are going to discuss is our shutter speed. What is the effect of the shutter speed? So in the first case, when we were discussing aperture, I wasn't shooting uh, on a manual mode, and I was only setting up my aperture values. I really wanted you to see, okay, what effect the aperture has on the overall scene. I did not want any change in the exposure, overall exposure of the pictures. So shutter speed was calculated by the camera, and all the changes were made by the camera in that aperture priority mode. But now I have switched to manual mode because I wanted to see what exactly the shutter speed does to the exposure, how much light it controls. So as you move to the faster shutter speed, the amount of light that will hit the sensor reduces, and obviously your picture will get darker. So this is the effect of shutter speed. So when a person is moving and you are trying to capture that person, you need to adjust your shutter speed accordingly. Okay, now the third thing, which is ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor. So when ISO is small, your sensor sensitivity gets smaller. But when ISO is large, your sensor sensitivity gets larger, and your sensor can pick up light very easily. But what happens, as you can see in the picture, as we move towards the higher ISO, our picture gets more grainy, and there are so many grains, the picture becomes unusable. You can see at 10,000 ISO it is almost unusable. But some of the new cameras, they have very good ISO performance, especially the one I'm using, Nikon Z6. At even 10,000 ISO, it has a very good performance. So now I'm going to share some scenarios where you can use different settings and you can start using those settings to really make your pictures better. Thank you very much. The first scenario is where I'm shooting some landscapes. So I really cranked up my aperture to larger values so that everything, foreground, background, end to end, I can get the sharpness in the image. So that was the reason I was shooting at high aperture. So you need a tripod, or maybe you need to rest your camera on some hard surface. So because if you're taking your aperture so high, obviously you will need to open your shutter for more time, so handshake and everything will come into play. So the next ones are the portraits. So generally when I'm shooting single person portraits, I will shoot with wide open aperture and use the smaller values of the aperture. In all these cases I have been using 1.8. You can use the same thing for some product shoots as well, if you don't want everything to be in focus. Okay, then the next thing is the nighttime photography. In nighttime photography, if the objects are moving, then you need high shutter speed, obviously. And to achieve high shutter speed, you will bring your aperture down, and then you can take your ISO high, like maybe in this scenario I have taken it to 1000. If you require even higher than that, then you have to take it higher than that, and then you can remove the noise in the post processing. Okay, the last scenario I'm going to discuss is the long exposure photography. So in long exposure photography, what do? You generally expose your scene for a longer period of time, so the shutter speed needs to be slowed down a lot. So in this one I have shot it at 2 seconds, and my aperture was 22 because I wanted everything to be in focus. So for example, if you want to shoot some cars trails in the night, then you can also use the same technique. Maybe you can take your shutter speed to 30 seconds or beyond. You can use the bulb mode and all the modes that are available to you. So these are a few examples which I wanted to discuss with you. If you have any further questions you want to ask to me, whether what settings you require for different scenarios, you can leave a comment and I will try to answer to the best of my knowledge. Thank you very much for watching. Do subscribe to my channel and keep supporting us, and you can also suggest some videos if you want on some particular subject, and keep supporting us. Thank you.